So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. Reading from Yeshayahu, then we can get a bit of comfort of knowing what's coming in the future, and it was then explained many times before. We have then roughly 10 plus 8 years left. We should also consider Metityahu, the priest, the first recorder of the spring feast, where the Messiah himself in the 24th chapter stated, because of the iniquity of the time, then his people was going to be granted with a reduction of time. So you have 10 plus 8 years minus the reduction, and this age then it's coming to an end. But let's then evaluate what went on a few years ago or a few decades ago, and ponder the reality of the time of the restoration period from this era, where then most of the world was unaware of. Truly, the holy instructions from the Israelic lineage holds the entire information, the entire concept, and, in quote, the roadmap from the time of the 60s until the very time when then the shout of sulfur comes down from heaven and destroys this age. Incredibly, many martyrs of the past, they are sounding so loudly during this time of the restoration, such as the Congolese Lumumba, that was hacked and cut to pieces and burned because of a few scoundrels of the West did not like his position. So then, on behalf of these martyrs, a few of them survived. For instance, Mr. Castro from Cuba is yet alive, and he's going to testify the returning of the Soviet Union as a power. Gladly, he was involved with the great revolution of his time, and the revolutionary spirit against the spirit of lust of the 1,000 years of deceit is coming to an end. But let's then make a distinction. Why then governments are changing? The lust part of it relates with governments indulging themselves, enslaving the people. We understand by the choice of the people, they do have lust and will to be in the future, but not through governments anymore. It's going to be by personal choices. While then Lumumba was then the first Prime Minister of Congo, a few words he said was so strong, because as he was then involved in a situation mostly not of his making, he said that the future of Congo is very bright. The future of Congo is secured, and every Congolese person will have a chance of becoming prosperous. Quite amazingly, during this time, he said a few words, though he did not have the future knowledge of computers yet. Obviously, he knew there were machines and great advances in technology. But as far as what he spoke, prosperity via computers, he would never imagine during his lifetime. Yet, what he said was true. We are during the time of a transition where the hand of the Creator no person can go against. Back then, during the 60s, you find then the socialist movement going against sections of the 1,000 years of deceit. The socialist parties of this time, they knew they were going against a legitimate system. However, they were in a non-legitimate time. Where do we find these, for instance, on our holy instructions? Because the point is, those people who were involved in the death of those martyrs, they're going to watch their own country going down. And what they did, it's going back to them. Let's make sure we understand no portion of sin comes back with no results. It always brings back results. Many times they tried to destroy the life of Fidel Castro, for instance, and every time they failed. But the US is so power hungry, they went as far as destroying their own president. That's how sick and devilish is a country that's trying at any cost to get power and control. President John was a very wise man. He knew he should not go against Mr. Castro in trying to destroy him, though he tried a few times half-heartedly, but he knew he shouldn't do this. Yet, United States destroyed its own president. We know for sure it was a military person from the USA ranks that destroyed and murdered their own president. From the manhole pointing the gun upwards from the water inlet of the road. So then, let's read the holy instructions and understand why the king of Babylon built an entire statue of gold for himself. Daniel then obviously was there. He received from heaven understandings of the dream of the king of Babylon. Not only he was able to say what the dream was, but he gave its interpretation. Then later on, the king even bowed down himself before Daniel. He knew the presence of the Creator was at the time very evident in the life of Daniel. Then, pondering later on, he decided it wasn't truly a big deal. He simply knew the information he wanted, and so be it. But then he wanted to change the entire understanding of Daniel in the Revelation on his behalf. If Daniel received then an understanding of a statue with many kinds of metals and then clay mixed with it at the base, that make the whole works with gold. It didn't work, did it? Let's read then a few sections of Daniel the 11th chapter. And let's find where these great martyrs were at during the 60s, where then the Soviet Union was dominating the world. Now, what can we understand of the time of deceit? Very simply, if you read the whole instructions, you find then in Gola or Revelation that 1,000 years was going to be granted to the Messiah himself, the Son, and 1,000 years to Nahashatan. The works of the Messiah and the works of his people was very known on the east, and Nahashatan and his work and his 1,000 years was then obviously evident from the west. Where do we find? Where was Lumumba in the holy instructions? From the Hebraic original manuscripts, as it was, and was then obviously from many years kept, how do we read it? And where do we find it? Explains then the movement of the socialists a first time. That's where then in the 60s there was a push for Soviet dominion and the socialist group, because the imperialism of so many nations was absolutely destroying the people, because they had no end and they had no boundaries. Where do we find it? Daniel, the 11th chapter, shows then the understanding of this factor very precisely, where then it states, "And the kingdom of the south shall be strong." Then you find a relationship and the forward motion movement at this time, and joining then with the kingdom of the north, but then at the first glance this first movement would not stand. That's where then the martyrs were at. Now, how does it explain during our time of the Restoration period? How do we explain then the Soviet Union coming back very strongly? And you can be sure of it, they wilt. Where do we find the Soviet Union? Some people, because they are ignorant, and some people, they give away their ignorancy so bluntly, they simply say, "Oh, but the whole instructions on the Bible doesn't say the name of the country." And obviously it's not going to say the name of the country, because if he did, then Nahashatan would change the name only to make sure the instructions were wrong. But then we have to understand the projections. Where do we find the Soviet Union? After the relationship of the Kingdom of the North and the Kingdom of the South related with the first movement of the socialist group, then we find they were not able to stand. But then a link with it goes afterwards, and then after a few decades later, then the Gentile netzer once again is strengthened. So those scoundrels of the West that were so concerned with the Congo becoming a problem, we truly read these, and when we hear those words from Lumumba, for instance, speaking of Congo, what he said was true. Congo shall be a great place. Where do we find Congo? Where do we find it? Yeshayahu, a prophet of Israel, a true prophet. He was from the lineage of the Hebrews, a Hebrew of the Hebrew. He prophesied many decades prior of Daniel. And then we read, for instance, in Yeshayahu chapter 1:8, he explains the land of Cush, explains then tabernacling, and woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Explains Congo very precisely. And then why then we should make these statement where we do not know where beyond the rivers of Ethiopia is at? They're always doubters of the holy instructions. But then what is involved with the time of the restoration period as far as the Gentiles are concerned? What is then the richest place in Africa, where they'll find most important mines, the rare materials? Isn't that in Congo? So Congo is in Yeshayahu the prophet. And when we speak of Yeshayahu, we should listen, because even the Messiah himself often quoted from Yeshayahu the prophet. And then Daniel gives us the answer very precisely. Now, what is the focus of these, as we can understand? Congo being a place of rare materials and joining up with the Soviets. Explaining the situation from the Hebraic perspective, it shouldn't take very long for the people to understand where is it going to lead. At some point, the Soviets are coming down. Now, it's not coming down, they are not going to become the great Northern Kingdom. They are going to become southbound. And they will organize Congo. You can be sure of it. The only reason why the Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba couldn't stay in power at the time, simply because the 1,000 years of deceit hadn't ended. We know the time of deceit ended in 2009. But 2009 was an uneventful year, because we did not have the understanding back then of this very important year. If he was around today, he was then rising as a big star. Because the time of deceit has ended. But I'm very sure of it. More people from those lines are going to understand the times and the seasons, and some of them will shine. And those murderers, they're going to understand that what they did was wrong. Such as CIA, and then the Belgian government, and the filthy works they were involved with. They're going to understand the rise of the Soviet Union. And boy, they're going to be pondering in what they did in the past. And for quite some time, it's going to haunt them. Many people during the time of Lumumba thought he was some sort of a devil, some sort of a Satan of any kind. Then from reading from the Holy Instruction today, you find the devils and Satan were those countries involved in destroying Lumumba. Can they go against the Holy Instructions? Granted, those people were ignorant, but the virtue of their sincerity as far as recognizing where they were and what they did as wrong does not set them on a path of being no guilty. They are guilty. What is then the future of the Socialist Party? The future is very great, because the Holy Instructions are saying so. During the time of the 1,000 years of deceit, you find then the scoundrelized religious system mixed with the world's filth, and stealing from the people then is rampant. When the computer comes around, and every time we deal with the money there is a transaction with it, then the stealing halts. China is dominating the world. China already has by itself 57% of the world's trade. That's a point on behalf of Lumumba. The Soviet Union is refurbishing the previous countries, the previous military. They have a great underwater technology, and they are making a coming back. Second point on behalf of Mr. Lumumba. And the future of Congo is then shortly, should be very cautious how I say this, but from the Holy Instructions you can roughly estimate $36, maybe give and take another year, some 4 years. And the Soviets are southbound already. They haven't started going down yet and making the route down there, but in the Holy Instructions, when we read, they are. What do we understand of the sons of Ishmael? And how we link what Lumumba did versus a very specific verse of the Holy Instructions, where we find then the violent ones. Sections of Africa are known throughout the world for being violent. But truly the word is not violent, it is a mixture of not receiving any kind of lies or deceit and being comfortable with it. They are the sort of a people, they want to live constantly with the truth. And when they don't find it, they get angry. Where are they at? Where do we find them? Verse 1:4 explains then the violent ones. Then you find later the establishment of the vision. Vision where then the prophet Yeshayahu mentioned chapter 1:8. The returning of the holy city. Firstly on the land of Cush. And do you want to know the people that are going to enforce the establishment of tabernacling? Are the violent ones. But then some people say, should not be the Hebrews then involved with forming the holy city? They should, but they don't want to do the work. If the Creator Himself does not pick each person as per His leadership, then His people, they are not interested. So divinely guided, these holy instructions, you find then the violent ones making sure tabernacling then is set up. If you want a great people in this planet that do understand tabernacling and the works of heaven, read the holy instructions, and you find there. Then many shall to stand up against the kingdom of the south, and the sons of the violent ones of your people shall lift up to establish the vision. Couldn't be any clearer. Now, should we say the Africans are Satans? Many people, they think only because they have a black skin of some sort, they are the sons of evil. And some of them, they go so far of scoundrelizing the holy instructions. Of course, they translate it in a wrong way to start with. What can you expect? And then making a comparison with Satan and then the black skin. Though sometimes when people get involved with witchcraft, they can have some relation, but in a normal understanding, you find from the holy instructions they are the very ones establishing the vision. What do we understand later on? Then down below you find very far away from this topic then the covenant. And the first time you find then the covenant. Then comes the importance of having tabernacling then set up. because so many of these forward motion movements from every direction in many distinct layers, they work together so fastly, sometimes to maintain a path where it should be. When you combine then the covenant, you combine the deceitful one, you combine the exactor, you combine then the overflow, then you combine then the understandings of the kingdom of the north, the kingdom of the south, then you understand has become a salad. Then the importance of establishing the vision. So if you understand the holy instructions, the 11th chapter of Daniel, you understand then the first section you find then during the time of Darius the Mede, and then Daniel himself was doing his work. He was then working for the first, second, and third kings of his time. Then you find the kingdom of the east, and then you find then the kingdom of the south, then you find the kingdom of the north, then you find then the first movement of the socialist group, and then you find this first time not able to conquer because it was during the time of deceit. Then you find the Soviet Union coming back. Then you find at some point Egypt. Egypt is another situation, because then we have to enter the understanding of the sons of Ishmael because of the relationship of Abraham and Hagar. Then turns back, and then we have to read then the kingdom of the south, understandably, then joining up with the kingdom of the north, and then the establishment of the vision, and afterwards you find it's absolutely very extremely confusing. At first glance is confusing. Now if you do understand, for instance, the relationship of tabernacle during the time of the Creator himself when he was leading Israel, and then the prophets, and then the completion of the spring feast, and the Messiah then establishing his 1,000 years, where he was then in charge of his holy cities, then you understand the covenant later, and the other covenant where then the Messiah was involved with. This second part was already confusing enough. That's why we have the establishment of the vision. It's far on top. These means understand these very precisely 100%. We should have the guidance of the holy city. It does not mean a person should not decipher what it means. You can, but there is a huge work of layers of many generations and many prophets, always from the Israelic lineage, pointing to the instructions. Then we have another page of an absolutely from top to base repleted with events. Then you have the returning of the United States to its own land. You have the returning of the ships. You have the linkage of a system linked with China. You have then the money exchange done via online instantly. Then you have the relationship of United States and the false covenant. In each of these events, there are scores and thousands of people involved. That's why when we read, for instance, Egypt is a huge country, thousands of years of experience, thousands of people, tens of thousands. Then you go down, you find the kingdom of the south, thousands of people. Then you find the kingdom of the north, thousands of people. Then we started having some skirmishes with each other, thousands of people dead. Then you find the sons of the violent ones then understanding the vision should be established. Then thousands of people involved. Then again the Soviets they take over the land and they organize, thousands of people also involved. So the Creator always uses very specific people to do specific work. Because a wrong move during these exact events causes catastrophe. Very wisely, you find then the establishment of the vision way far on top. And from the time where Egypt then is established, then you find shortly after skirmishes with the sons of Ishmael. Later on you find the strength of the Soviet Union, and shortly after the establishment of the vision. The rest until the end of the 11th chapter is decipherable with a certain amount of precision, in fact. But there is a reason why tabernacling is way there on top. And the violent ones are going to make sure this vision must be established. So the death of Mr. Lumumba was not in vain. What he said was true. What he said of his enemies was true. The only situation was on behalf of those who were against Lumumba was because of the time of the seat had not ended. If Mr. Lumumba was around this very day, his entire works would absolutely flourish. Next time we're going to evaluate more of these and make some linkages with Galah, Revelation, so then we can understand what's coming in the future based from what went on during the time of the past. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.